This presentation, titled The Advantages and Pitfalls with Internal Auditing, comes to us from Daniel McConville. Daniel is the director of McConville Risk Solutions and has extensive experience in food and hospitality, providing both food safety and occupational health and safety services to a number of industries. McConville Risk Solutions are recognized as food safety specialists and work with some of Australia's largest providers. As a tertiary qualified food safety and OHS professional, Daniel has expertise in developing and implementing food safety management systems and occupational health and safety management systems to a range of industries, including education, hospitality, health and aged care, local government, facilities management, and food manufacturing. Prior to commencing McConville Risk Solutions, Daniel worked for the Willis Group, the world's third largest insurance broker, in their workplace risk team, during which he worked on several projects for major companies. And with that, take it away, Daniel.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for that introduction, and welcome to this presentation on the advantages and pitfalls with internal auditing. So in this presentation, I'm going to be using my experiences as both an internal and an external auditor. And I'll be looking at the areas where I've made mistakes as an internal auditor, but also I'll be looking at things that I've seen in my time as an external auditor. So what has worked for organisations and the things that I've seen that offer areas for improvement. So if we just have a look at what is being covered in today's presentation. So I will go through and talk a little bit about internal auditing. So give you a definition of what is internal auditing. And then I will get into what the advantages of internal auditing are. And again, that will be based on my experience. Then I'll go into the disadvantages of internal auditing. And I'll finish off with how to get the most out of your internal audit processes. Okay, so if we first have a look at what is an internal audit. And I found a really good definition of internal auditing, and it comes from the Institute of Internal Auditors. And it says that internal auditing is an independent, objective assurance and consulting activity designed to add value and improve an organisation's operations. It helps an organisation accomplish its objectives by bringing a systematic, disciplined approach to evaluate and improve the effectiveness of risk management, control, and governance processes. So in simple terms, an internal audit is a review of your organisation's processes and procedures against a criteria or a set of objectives, and it is undertaken or completed generally by someone from within the business. We know that an external audit is really a review of systems or, again, a set of processes against a certain criteria. And sometimes that criteria could be a standard. So it might be an ISO 45001 standard or ISO 22000, or it could be a number of different standards. For an internal audit, the criteria is simply an internal system or process that you are reviewing to ensure that it is giving you the desired outcome. So really, an internal audit is responsible for monitoring the effectiveness of the internal control processes that have been established by management. With certification or surveillance audits, they happen either on an annual basis or on a biannual basis. However, with an internal audit, it can happen daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly. It doesn't matter. It is, in fact, it's a continuous process. And the internal audit can be undertaken by a third party who specialise in auditing, or commonly it's done internally, and it involves the various areas or departments of your company. And of course, it does involve your employees. And that is different to an external audit. So with an external audit, it's generally completed by a certifying body. It is at a set time or a set date. So generally it's annually or biannually. And we often refer to those types of audits as certification audits or surveillance audits. Okay, so now that we're done with the definitions, let's have a look at, we'll start with what the advantages are of an internal audit. Now I've got 5 there on the slide. There are more advantages to an internal audit process than the ones that I have got listed there. However, the reason that I have chosen to discuss these today is that I see them as the most common advantages. And I will go through and we will have a look at these in more detail on the next slide. So if you've got other ones, that's fine. If yours aren't there, that's fine also. As I said, these are the ones that I have seen as the most common ones. And they're familiarisation with processes and procedures, effective review of management processes and procedures, continuous review, easier to evaluate how effective your processes and systems are. And the last advantage there is improving problem solving. So if we go through and have a look at these, so the first one there, familiarisation with processes and procedures. And the main advantage of auditing your own workplace procedures is that it will enable you to familiarise yourself with what is written in those policies or in those workplace procedures. My experience in auditing workplace procedures, and regardless of the industry that we are talking about, is that some businesses often have little understanding of the content of their own procedures. So in some cases, these procedures have been written by consultants for a specific purpose, and that could be for a tender response, it could be for a certification audit, but they've been written by a consultant, and then once that activity is over, they go and sit on the company intranet, or they sit in a manual in someone's office, and they never get looked at until the next time they're needed. So the other thing is too that many employers are not familiar with their procedures, and they only discover what's in them after they've had an incident, or they may have had a visit from the regulator, or they are undertaking an external audit. And it's really very hard for workers to follow a procedure if no one knows what is actually written in that procedure. So that is probably one of the main advantages that I find is it does help organisations, or does give organisations an understanding of what the procedure says and how it could actually add value to your organisation. The next point there is the effective review of management processes and procedures. And another benefit of the internal audit, and this ties into the previous point, is that it does facilitate more effective management of the organisation. So as an internal auditor and undertaking an internal audit, you're able to identify any weaknesses or deficiencies within the organisation's operations or within their internal controls. Therefore, management can use the identification of these weaknesses to improve their systems and hopefully to provide a better service or a better product to the customer or to the end user. And look, if it doesn't help improve your product, what it may also do is add efficiencies to the process or the system. And the third point there continuous review. Now, with an internal audit, it gives you the opportunity to conduct the review of the performance of your organisation in a time frame which you control. Now, whether that's weekly, monthly, 6 monthly, whatever it is, it's your time frame. You determine the time frame, or the organisation determines the time frame. Unlike a certification audit or a surveillance audit, you don't need to wait till the end of the year to review your company's performance. And the advantage of that is that if the process has got off track, or the procedure has gone down a different path, by undertaking an internal audit, it will actually help you change course and will help you correct those mistakes immediately and put the organisation back on the right path. So the establishment of an internal audit function does not need to be a major investment. It can be as simple as putting a schedule or a plan together and then allocating adequate resources and then following the plan. It can just be as simple as that. Some other advantages of an internal audit is that it's easier to evaluate how effective your processes and systems are, particularly the implementation of those processes and systems. So it does provide you with an opportunity to improve those processes, those procedures, and those systems. So if you are continually auditing your procedures to ensure their ongoing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness, as well as challenging any negative outcomes and learning from those shortfalls, then really your business should be improving. Now, remember that everything is not bad in an audit. Every non-conformance that we get is not bad. An internal audit gives that organisation the opportunity to improve and help the growth of a company. And I can give you an example of that. So there was a company that I was working with, and they had problems getting workers reporting hazards in the workplace. So we reviewed the procedure and we found that the system had changed since the procedure was first implemented. And the system had changed for the better because that was identified during an internal audit, and the organisation had come up with a better way, a more effective way to report hazards. And that was through the use of technology, as technology had made it a lot easier to report hazards. So the organisation was able to simplify the hazard reporting process using technology, and by also getting feedback from the review process. And now in that organisation, or I won't say all workers, but most of the workers are now reporting hazards simply because they find it easier. And that process change came about through an internal audit. And it's also important to remember here that continuous improvement, as this was, is an element of the ISO 45001 standard, which is the standard for occupational health and safety management systems. Now, whilst in a lot of countries, continuous improvement is not a regulation, it's not something that you have to do, it is recommended that all organisations have some sort of continuous improvement element in their management systems. And just the last one there, improving problem solving. So similar to the previous point, during an internal audit, you may identify some real or potential problems that could possibly put your organisation at risk. And these can be in the forms of gaps in processes, or they could even be behavioural issues. Now, the advantage of this is that you can resolve the problem or adjust the behaviour before it actually becomes a serious issue or risk. So it is giving management the opportunity to act. And ideally, when you identify these at-risk behaviours or gaps in procedures, they would be discussed with the relevant stakeholders, and management then would also get buy-in from the workers. And this is where the improvement in the problem solving comes in, because by getting the workers involved in the resolution process, it is going to create an environment of more effective resolutions. And the bonus of that is that the decisions then that management are going to be making are going to be more informed decisions. So therefore, they are going to be more beneficial for the organisation. Okay, so we've had a look at the advantages of internal auditing. And so let's have a look at the disadvantages now of internal auditing. And these are some of the areas, and I generally call them the pitfalls of internal auditing. And it's where the process of internal auditing might not be as effective as what it could be. Now, again, the 5 points that I have here, these are the common ones. These are the ones that have come from my experience as both an internal and an external auditor. And as I said, you might have some different ones, and that's great. So don't worry if you've got some that aren't up here. As I said, these are the ones that I've found to be the most common ones. And they are the limitations of those conducting the internal audit, management being ignorant, internal audit not seen as adding value, or internal auditing not being suitable for your organisation. And the last one there is complacency. So if we have a look first at the limitations of those conducting the internal audit. And to start with another example, recently I was undertaking a health and safety audit for a business, and they were preparing for a certification audit. And it was apparent that the business had written policies and procedures, but really they had given little thought to how they were going to implement those policies and procedures, and also little thought to the content of them. So they just thought, look, we'll just write them, put them in there, and then that'll be great. And they also thought that by having a registered third party or a certifying body certifying their health and safety management system, that would help them demonstrate that their business is managed efficiently and effectively, and also responsibly. So we undertook an internal audit, and some of that was conducting a review of their procedures. And one of those procedures was around monthly inspections, which formed part of their internal audit process. So I asked the team leader to demonstrate to me how the procedure for monthly inspections worked, particularly out on the factory floor, and also what understanding the workers had of the inspection process. I handed the team leader the procedure, and after he read it, he simply said to me, look, I really don't have a great understanding of the inspection process. I only do it because I was told that I had to do it. So to avoid this pitfall, to avoid this from happening, ensure that the workers that you enlist to help you through the internal auditing process have some form of training, or as a minimum, have some idea of the criteria, and in this case it was around procedures, that they are going to be auditing. So in my experience, if those employees who don't have an understanding of the internal audit process are left to conduct internal audits on their own, then what the organisation is going to end up with is a really glossy report. It's going to be full of great scores or great outcomes. However, they're never really going to know what the real issues are or what are some of the possible risks that exist or may exist in their workplace. Now, for internal auditors, they don't necessarily need to go through and undertake a 5-day auditor course. There are internal auditor courses there that are 1 or 2 days in length, and they can do those if you like. They don't necessarily have to do those. But what I would be doing as a minimum is I would encourage you to explain to the workers how the internal audit process was or how it works, and I would be taking them through some internal audits and doing those with them before you let them, before you send them out on their own. And as I've said before, this is probably one of the key disadvantages of an internal audit, is the limitation of those people, internal audit staff, who are undertaking the audit. So some of them, they may not have the competency, the skills, or the knowledge to do that. And so therefore, the purpose of your internal audit fails, because it's there to look at the positives and the areas of improvement for the organisation. But if the staff undertaking that function aren't competent, then you're really not going to get what you need to get out of that internal audit. The next point, they're not seen as adding value. And some organisations that I've dealt with really don't see the value in internal auditing. They see it as a costly experience. And the other point is they believe that if they're having an annual surveillance audit through a certifying body or certifying organisation, then what they'll do is they'll just leave everything to them, and we'll let the certifying body come through and tell us how to improve the process or where some of the areas for improvement are. So they also see that they may see a lack of value in the internal audit process because they're continually getting the same result. Now, if you're getting the same result, that's a trigger to actually have a look at the process, but I will talk more about that on the next slide, which is under complacency. And the last point here on this slide is that it may not be suitable for your organisation. Now, the reason why I have included this point is because until I started to work with some small organisations, I had actually heard that it may not be suitable for your organisation, but I really couldn't understand how that would be possible. But for smaller organisations, some of them are often under-resourced, or they have different priorities to larger organisations. So for them, having to take a person off the production line for an entire day or a significant part of the day to undertake an internal audit could be costly, or it might actually put that organisation behind. And when you go through their processes, they just have a different method of undertaking an internal audit. So they have a different set of checks and balances to ensure that those products that they are sending out actually meet a standard or a set criteria. They just do it differently. All right, so they're still probably getting the same result as you may get with an internal audit. They are just doing it differently. So the next point is management being ignorant. Again, and this is another key point in the process. Now, it's human nature to want to be told the good news. It's human nature to be told that you're doing a great job. And with some organisations that I've dealt with, they only want to hear the good news. They want the bad news or the non-conformances glossed over, or they'll tell you, no, don't talk about that. Just put it in the report, and I will read that later. Or worse still, it's a bit of an easier way to actually hide that from management. So Professor Andrew Hopkins wrote in his book, Lessons from Longford, that one of the findings which emerges from every disaster inquiry is that company auditing provided only good news and failed to identify problems which became very obvious after the event. Hopkins went on to say that it is probable that audits which most effectively transmit bad news to the top of the hierarchy are audits which have abandoned any benchmarking or comparative purpose. So the mistakes here made by the organisation is that getting a non-conformance during an internal audit is not a cause for doom or gloom. It's not time to go and reprimand personnel. Moreover, it should be seen as an opportunity to improve your management system or those activities that link in to that management system. All right, so it should be seen really as an opportunity where you can improve. And this is where leadership is so important. So this is where the leaders need to stand up. So they need to encourage workers to deliver all the news, good, bad, indifferent. So the positives, the negatives, the opportunities for improvement, we need to get all of those. And if management are going to continually put pressure on internal auditors not to get any non-conformances or to water down the reports or brush things under the carpet, then really what you are going to get is just a sanitized version of your internal audit. And the danger with that is that by brushing things under the carpet and only providing management with the information that they want to hear, then this could lead to a more serious incident happening because the right information has not been provided. And certainly that was confirmed in the above quote or the previous quote from Professor Andrew Hopkins. So the key point here is when undertaking an internal audit, you need to think of bad news or non-conformances as an opportunity to improve and use them as a form of continuous improvement. So if you're an internal auditor and you're working with managers who don't want to hear the bad news, then just remind them of the audit definition that we used earlier in the presentation. And that is that the internal audit is a tool used to examine processes and activities and to gauge whether you're conforming to standards and procedures and whether there are any further opportunities for improvement. And the last point there is complacency. Now, complacency in internal auditing, certainly in my experience, develops over time. It doesn't happen straight away. And the audit might be useful at the beginning, but over time, it gets frustrating for workers and it just seems to be a bit of a chore. And that is where now the internal auditor is starting to become complacent. Now, complacency is fairly clear. If you continue to do the same thing for long enough, then eventually it does become a chore and it's not a means of improvement anymore. And then when this happens, we start to miss things, we don't look hard enough. And again, we're not then getting an accurate account of where the organisation is at. And a way to determine that, from my experience, is to go back and have a look at your previous internal audit results or your scores. Now, how you score them or whatever the results look like, go back and have a look at those. So if you're consistently getting scores of, say, between 95 and 100% on your internal audits, and there's no non-conformances, then it's actually time to change things up a bit. either score yourself harder or change auditors, or what you can do is actually get someone else to undertake the internal audit with the internal auditor. Now, and if you do that and you go back and you're still getting the same results of 95 and 100 or no non-conformances, then that's great, because at least then you know that you have gone through the process thoroughly and that it is in pretty good shape. All right, so just to finish off, how to get the most out of the internal audit process. And the first point there around communication is such a key point in a lot of areas of auditing. So make sure that you are communicating the entire process to workers and to management. Don't drip feed them information. If they understand what the entire process is up front, then that's only going to make it easier for you as the internal auditor when you actually get to do the internal audit. The next point there, asking for help. If you need help as an internal auditor, then ask. If you don't feel you have the skills, the knowledge, the competency to do it, then make sure that you ask for help. The third point there, planning the process. Please don't leave it until the last minute. Some organisations look at their procedures and they have that many procedures that they just find the prospect of regularly reviewing them as pretty daunting. Now, if this is the case in your organisation, what I recommend that you do is have a look at those procedures and maybe break them up into high, medium, or low risk procedures and conduct your internal auditing over stages. Okay, so an example of that could be that with your high risk procedures, they all get audited in the first 12 months. So if you've got 20 of those, well, you roughly do 2 a month. Then with your medium risk procedures, they get done in the second 12 months. And you might also go back and revisit, say, half of your high risk procedures. Then in the third year, you undertake an internal audit on your low risk procedures and then the other high risk procedures that you didn't audit or you haven't audited. So what happens then is over a 3-year period, all your procedures get audited, whether they're high, low, or medium risk, and they'll get audited at least once, and your high risk procedures will get audited twice. So it's about thinking about the process and planning it out over a period of time and making sure then that everything gets done. The next point there is training your internal auditors, and I spoke about this earlier. Just make sure that those who are responsible for undertaking the internal audit process have been trained. Now, as we explained in the other slide, they don't need to go through a 5-day auditor's course. You can put them through a 1-day internal auditor's course, or you can train them in-house. But also too, part of that training should be is the more experienced auditors working with them for a couple of audits, internal audits. So just to make sure that they've got the process right. So rather than just put them through training and then send them out, actually send them out and work with them for a couple of audits. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the presentation. So my details are there. If you want to share your experiences with me on internal auditing, that's great. Or if you have any questions about this presentation, then yeah, you can get in contact with me there. So thank you for watching this presentation. Hopefully you have got something out of it and you have taken something away. So again, thanks again for watching.
And thank you, Daniel McConville, for that look at the advantages and pitfalls of internal auditing. And that concludes this presentation.